The heroes have just identified the location where the cultists are going to summon a cryo-demon in the sewers beneath Dwerdel. The stage is set for them to descend into darkness, confront the great evil, save the day, and bring the campaign to a rousing conclusion. And that's when the players take everything they know to the Archmage Arendelle, whose immense powers allow him to thank the PCs politely, and then deal with the cryo-demon entirely by himself. Womp womp. A unique challenge to running urban campaigns is figuring out what happens if the PCs, confronted with some horrible crime or circumstance, do the logical thing and seek help from powerful allies. And this problem grows as technology, or its magical equivalent, improves communication, travel speeds, or both. Low-level D&D characters in the middle of the woods tend not to have any recourse. Modern teenagers with cell phones are a completely different story. The problem can also get worse in what I'll call mythological settings, where single individuals, powerful wizards, Sith lords, starship captains, can have immense power. This is because it can be both easier for the PCs to get access to these characters, and often harder to explain why these people don't want to get involved. Let's take a step back for a moment. Why is this a problem? Well, first, it really mucks up the challenge level of the scenario when Batman calls in Superman to deal with the Joker. And second, it's dramatically unsatisfying to go through all the preamble of a conflict only to be sidelined while Elminster heads off to experience the end of the story. Now, there's often an unspoken genre convention or table agreement that calling in the big guns is poor form and shouldn't be done because it's disruptive to the desired experience, to the players being the heroes. If you want to make that a spoken agreement with your players, more power to you, but there are a couple things to be aware of. First, this can actually create a different sort of problem for some players because it creates a tension between what their characters should be doing, based on their understanding of who that character is, and what their character is allowed to do. Now, for some players, making this an explicit spoken agreement can resolve the problem, because with the option definitively off the table, the tension disappears. But for other players, it will actually make the problem worse, because either acknowledging the tension or explicitly prohibiting the choice is even more disruptive to their role-playing. Now, second, calling in the big guns is not exclusively a problem. It's also an opportunity, and there's a lot of really cool experiences that you're taking off the table if you just flat-out ban these interactions. Superman shouldn't just swoop into every Batman story, but world's finest crossovers can be really awesome. And on the flip side, this also means that sometimes players call in the big guns because it's what makes sense for their characters to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's what the players want. They don't want to be sidelined while the big guns take care of everything, and they're actually hoping that you'll reject the offer so that they can have the satisfaction of role-playing their character truthfully and get what they want by continuing to be in the starring roles for the rest of the adventure. All of which means that at some point, you're going to run into a situation where the PCs decide that it's time to call in the big guns. What happens next? Option 1, it works. They call in the big guns have a good reason to be involved, and they come in and they deal with the situation, problem solved. Now, the trick here is to frame getting the help of the big guns as being the major accomplishment of the scenario, and then just letting loose and really enjoying the curb stomping done by the big guns as the reward for a job well done. If you want an example of this from another medium, look at The Lord of the Rings. Most of the Two Towers consists of the heroes trying to convince one major ally or another to put some skin in the game. Theoden, Treebeard, Denethor. Or take this scene from the movies. Pippin literally summons an entire army to help solve his problems. Now, this approach works if the players see the big guns as a manifestation of their will, no different than a fireball or a powerful magical artifact. They were the ones who called on the big guns. Getting the big guns involved was what saved the day, and they were the ones who did it. Now, this can be a tricky balancing act to pull off, but it can be immensely satisfying when you do. Option 2. They're busy. The big guns are busy doing something else and therefore can't help. Now, this can be used preemptively if there's a time crunch. Sorry, Harry, Dumbledore isn't in his office right now. But it can be equally effective if the conflict comes up at the last possible second. Great, says Arundel. I'm glad we're all gathered here to go down into the vault together. Now that we've fully committed to this course of action and have no choice but to... Wait! There's a Tarisk attacking the harbor. I've got to go. Now, this works better, of course, when it emerges naturally out of the narrative. For example, in my Dragon Heist campaign, the group had recruited Renaer and the Black Tears to assist in raiding the Castellanters. That gig resulted in them kidnapping, Lord Castellanter, and taking him to the Blackstaff. Now, at this point, I could clearly see the risk of the PC's contributions for the rest of the campaign getting washed out by a confluence of powerful NPCs. The stakes had gotten high enough that it would be hard to justify the Blackstaff and the Open Lord of Waterdeep not getting directly involved. So I framed the Blackstaff's response accordingly. She called up Renaer and the Black Tears to help her perform a rapid-fire investigation of the Castellanters to accumulate the evidence necessary to make the arrest legal after the fact. The Blackstaff and Renaer were still helping the PCs, but only off-screen and tangentially. You can also bake larger priorities into the setting. For example, in my campaign set in Monte Cook's Ptolus, there's an invading army that's marching towards the city. No matter how dire the stakes are in whatever scenario the PCs have gotten themselves involved in, it's not hard to argue that preparations for a literal war are more important, giving me an easy trump card that I can play anytime I need it. On the other hand, you don't actually need to go into a lot of detail as long as you've firmly established that the NPC in question is tied up in more important affairs, that they're operating at a higher tier than the PCs. For example, when the Dragon Heist PCs later sent word to the Blackstaff that they'd located the vault, the Blackstaff simply replied, "Good luck, let me know how it goes." The implication was that she was busy doing something else, and trusted the PCs to take care of it. On that note, you usually want the NPC, even though they don't have the time or resources to deal with the problem, to acknowledge how clearly important the information the PCs are bringing them is, rather than belittling it or dismissing it. Unless, of course, the PCs really are just wasting their time. This validates the player's actions and ratchets up the stakes. Now, the quickest way to achieve this effect is for the NPC to say, "This is clearly very important, which is why I'm deputizing you to deal with it." In my Ptolus campaign, for example, I had the Commissar specifically deputize the PCs to deal with the local activities of the Chaos Cults. Ergo, any time they discovered some new, horrible thing that the Chaos Cults were involved with, the official response could neatly default to, "Keep up the good work." Another effective way of handling this brush-off is for the big gun to give the PCs some form of assistance, even if they can't get directly involved. A suitcase full of cash, a platoon of elven archers, the phone number of an old friend in Cairo they should talk to. The idea of rewarding the PCs for going to the big guns is a common theme here. Even if the big guns turn the PCs down flat and refuse to help, if there's still some sort of reward for having gone to them in the first place, then the players will feel validated in their choice. It also tends to just make sense. Unless the PCs were completely off base in their belief that the NPC would care about what's happening, the NPC is going to want to help. Option 3, there's a reason they can't help. Later in my Dragon Heist campaign, when Lady Castellanter kidnapped one of the PC's adopted kids, the PC sent a message to the Blackstaff. Since we'd already established that the Blackstaff was investigating the Castellanters, there was no good reason for her not to drop everything and come to help. But I knew that a fight with Lady Castellanter would become trivial if the Blackstaff was involved. So Lady Castellanter erected some wards around her location that would have specifically detected the Blackstaff's approach, since she knew that the Blackstaff was now involved and had been investigating her family. The Blackstaff detected the wards, warned the PCs, and veered off. She'd be nearby, but with Lady Castellanter holding a hostage, it was just too risky for her to come barreling in with the PCs. This was also a hybrid technique, because the Blackstaff actually gave them valuable intel on where Lady Castellanter might be holding their son, so she'd already helped them to a certain extent, and the PCs had been rewarded for calling her in. You can read about what happened next in the campaign journal, which I've linked to in the Font of All Knowledge down below. Now, in my Ptolus campaign, another major element of Act 2 is the exploration of the Bane Warrens, a mega-dungeon beneath the city. These, once again, pose a potentially existential threat in the middle of the city, and there once again needs to be some explanation for why the city authorities and other major players don't come barging in to resolve the crisis. In this case, I simply turned the Bane Warrens into a point of religious dispute. The two halves of a schismed church effectively checkmated each other, and the civil authorities in the form of the Commissar refused to get involved because of the tangle of church politics.
We have not come here by chance. I do not believe in chance. When I see 3 objectives, 3 captains, 3 ships, I do not see coincidence. I see providence.
Option 4. Split them up. Now that the big guns have been called in for the actual op, split the group up. While the big guns do one thing, the PCs need to do another. For example, we could imagine a Dragon Heist campaign where the PCs have successfully recruited the Blackstaff, or Manchun, or Laeral Silverhand to come into the vault with them and retrieve Never Ember's stolen hoard at the end of the campaign. But as the vault cracks open, the bad guys suddenly arrive with something incredibly dangerous. The Castellanters summon a pit fiend, or Xanathar himself shows up with a bevy of gazers and mind flayers, or Jarlaxle teleports in with a platoon of elite drow mercenaries. The big gun has to deal with the big threat. They turn to the PCs and shout, "This could all be a distraction! Get into the vault! Make sure the gold is secure!" This is also a good example of how, as the game master, you want to pay attention to why the players want to call in the big guns. For example, they may have concocted some incredibly convoluted scheme that requires them to be in 9 places at the same time, and they have no idea how they can pull it off by themselves. That's a perfect opportunity to just lean back, let them bring in the big guns without fuss, and then peel them off into separate action groups. Option 5. Flip it around. Now that the big guns are involved and putting themselves in charge, they send the PCs to do something crucial for their success. Returning to our example of the Dragon Heist vault, when Jarlaxle shows up with his force of drow mercenaries, the Blackstaff turns to the PCs and says, "Hold them off here. I'm heading into the vault." Once the drow goons are defeated, the PCs follow and discover the Blackstaff standing over the dragon she's just slain. A dragon? Whew! It's a good thing they called her in. If you're more dramatically inclined, you can also frame this so that the PCs show up just in time to take the shot that finishes off the dragon. "Thank you," says the Blackstaff. "It was a more difficult foe than I had expected." Now, you can also reverse expectations here by making it look like the crucial part of the mission. The thing that the big guns are going to go do is one thing, and the ancillary goal the PCs are going to do is some other thing, while in reality, it's actually the exact opposite. So the PCs get sent to pursue the ancillary goal in a supporting capacity, but then it turns out that they're actually doing the absolutely vital thing that's going to save the day. "Hey, I thought Grisnak was going to be at the fort." "Yeah, well, he's here, and we're out of time, so let's go." Option 6. They are the big guns. The zero-to-hero dynamic of D&D tends to get ingrained to the point where we sometimes forget that it's fully possible to have a campaign dynamic where there aren't any big guns to appeal to because the PCs are the biggest guns around. Now, this can be particularly true within a specific set of parameters. Even in D&D, for example, it's quite possible to run a campaign where once the PCs hit mid-level play, they're the most powerful people in town, and possibly for hundreds or thousands of miles around. On that note, even if the PCs aren't the biggest guns in town, this is nevertheless a great time to have low-level adventuring parties come knocking on the PC's door with problems that they need a big gun to solve for them. Remind the players that they are big damn heroes. And if you want to be a big damn hero, hit the subscribe button down below. You can also support these videos on Patreon. There's a link for all that in the Font of All Knowledge. Good gaming. This is Justin Alexander, and I'll see you at the table.